At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES.
Only on Super NES.
You're listening to the SNES Podcast with your host, Soulblazer.
Hello, everybody. This is Super NES Podcast, episode number 266. As always, these are your hosts, Greg and Joe.
Hello.
And today we're covering a game that initially we had planned to cover in our Bad Games episode. And there's a funny, it's actually a funny side story which we may cover upon in the future podcast about another game that was planned to be in the Bad Game episode that may come up later on. But anyway, several games that were included initially in our list for the episode were cut out for one reason or another. And this game was one that I always been curious to play. I never got around to playing it myself. But I'm like, I think this game, for everything I've heard about it, probably has enough meat and deserves to be given its own treatment and or roast, depending upon how you feel about it. It's like a separate episode. So, and if this is a bit shorter than usual, no problem. We got a backup plan again because of the bad game episode list again that is mentioned. So, anyway, we are covering the adventure game Less to the Unlikely in this episode, which is a very controversial game. Because it's a very polarizing game. Back then as now, people either love the game or hate the game. So it's one of those one of those games that's very polarizing with how people feel about it. I grew up during the golden age of point and click adventure games on the computer. I played tons of Sierra and then LucasArts games and whatnot. So it wasn't always. The conversions to this consoles weren't always the best, depending upon how they were handled. King's Quest V and Maniac Mansion I thought were great being brought over to the NES. But certain games suffered in the conversion, mostly because that technically most consoles didn't have keyboards and mice. Obviously Super NES did have a mouse. I think the Genesis also had a mouse released too at some point, I think. I think I remember hearing or seeing or see about that. Not an official one, but I think there was a third-party mouse at least available system. But and the Dreamcast, of course, also had its own keyboard. Mostly support games such as Phantasy Star Online. But anyway. Conversion of those games to consoles wasn't always the smoothest. In some cases it worked well, some cases it didn't. So, usually games that were developed from the ground up as adventure games worked pretty well on the systems. And this game was a game that was developed to ground up as an adventure game. So, control shouldn't be a problem here. Again, we'll get into all that, but. Anyway, this is always a game I heard about. Like I said before, it's very polarizing. Angry Video Game Nerd did one of those famous episodes on this game. So, it's been covered in numerous podcasts and videos over the years. And I just figured this was interesting enough that I don't think this game deserves to be shoehorned into a bunch of a dozen other possibly bad games. So let's give it a bit more light. One game we did decide there were other games that we did decide we're going to get full treatments, and then later down the line decided let's go back to the original idea and not cover these games. But anyway, a little bit behind the scenes stuff there. But anyway, I'm pretty sure from talking to you before, Joe, that you were kind of the same boat I was, that you heard about this game beforehand but never played it.
Yeah, so I discovered this game through the aforementioned AVGN episode where he covered this game. Yep. That is the only experience I had with this game beforehand. Spoiler, I'm not the angry video game nerd, but we share some similar thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, so I know ABGN, like I know Chris as a character, and like and maybe I'm just more tolerant of so-called quote unquote bad games, because there are a lot of games he wrote that I grew up with and that I had nostalgia for that I really enjoy. Like Jaws, for example, like in the NES, is like is actually I think a good game for what it is, but it's not amazing. But I don't believe it deserves. I've always firmly believe that game doesn't belong on a bad game list. But as we talked about before, not only bad games very subjective, but because the internet, a whole bunch of people love to heap crap upon games that probably don't deserve it. So, another reason I wanted to do this separately was I wanted to give this game a fair shake, to really see, if it deserved a lot of this like that it got. And it wasn't until I started doing research I found out that actually, then as of now, a lot of people have actually said positive things about this game too. So we'll get into like all that. The developer of this company is actually pretty interesting. It's probably a company that you're quite familiar with, Joe, because you're interested in video games these days. The game is developed by Visual Concepts. Which was founded in 1988, still in business today. They're now owned by Take-Two Interactive, and they are their primary company under their 2K label. There are other companies that are under the 2K label, but Visual Concepts is by and far the largest company under that 2K label for Take-Two games. Yep. So, and I mentioned Joe because primarily they're known these days. Visual Concepts is known for making sports games, primarily basketball and wrestling games. So. And football also earlier before batting at lights and stuff. In fact, Visual Concepts has not made a non-sports game since they made the port. Since they made the game adaptation of Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer in 2007. Every game released since then has been every game released since then has been a sports game.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And actually, Fantastic Four was like kind of an anomaly, because before that, their last non-sports game was Toe Jam and Earl 3, Mission Earth in 2002 for the Xbox. So, so for 23 years, the last 23 years, they released 2 non-sports games. So they're definitely known these days for being a sports game company, but they didn't start out that way. They developed some pretty good games in the 90s. They were doing sports games early in their history for sure. Their first one was a game we've not covered yet, Bill Walsh College Football for Super NES. Back in 1993, but they have developed and made in the 90s some pretty good games. So there are other wrestling games being made besides the WWE 2K series these days, right, Joe? Is that it?
Well, so they had an AEW game a couple of years ago, which kind of fell on its face.
Yep.
And there has been a spiritual successor to like the WrestleFest games, called Retromania. And that one was pretty good, and they've been giving away free DLC for it, so they keep making that game better as it goes on. Right. But I mean, you had the Fire Pro Wrestling game.
Which is still a thing, right? They're still making those?
Right. It's still a thing, and I don't know if there's a console version, but I can tell you on PC, that thing is still going. It's still going strong. You get, community-created characters all the time, so you can keep the roster updated. I don't think it's officially supported anymore. I think it's literally just the community now. But yeah, that game's still going too. So, but yeah, essentially, I mean, the 2K games are kind of what you got for wrestling, unfortunately. I wish there were others that were kind of pumping them out and had some competition there, because competition just makes everything around it better. But
You can find a lot of indie sports games on Steam, by the way. Like I mentioned, Steam again here. There are plenty of indie devs who have made their own fan loves football or wrestling or basketball games or whatever that are the track record is mixed, as you would expect for indie games. Some are terrible and some are very good. So I mean, you just have to look at the reviews and play the game demo. If there's one available, that kind of stuff. So some of the work was actually done by a smaller subsidiary company called Pangea Software, which I'll mention here in a bit. But Visual Concepts did do most of the bread and butter work like this game. It was released in North America in January of 1994. Published by a company called DTMC. I could not find much about them. They look like a very short-lived publisher for games in North America. In 1994, they published several games for the Game Boy, the Game Boy Super NES. Nothing else they've covered so far yet. They also published for the Super NES California games too: Rama Half, Hard Battle, The Adventures of Dr. Franken, and Firestriker. Firestriker actually looks like a pretty interesting game. I'll have to make a mental note on that to look at that game.
Yeah, I was going to say the Rama 1/2 game's not bad for a fighting game on the Super Nintendo, and I think we reviewed Dr. Franken. That wasn't a bad game. So
did we? I don't remember that. Okay, so
maybe I'm mixing that up with the little kid Dracula game that we played.
Might have also been in our bad game episode too. So
that's possible too. Yeah, but anyways,
But anyway, yeah. So not much information available on this company. They didn't last very long. It looks like, it looks like at least they didn't publish games very long. The game actually, so Lester Likely did actually get a Japanese port. It came out in Japan in September of 1994. Published by Asmik Ace. Asmik's a pretty big Japanese arcade / game game developer. They're still around today. So they're no longer doing video games nowadays. They're a film, they're a film and anime company. But in the past, they were known for being a pretty good video game company. So it's curious. This game did get a Japanese release since it was Western created. I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything online to state this directly, but I believe it's because adventure games have always been very popular in Japan as well too. So I mean, we mentioned last time with wizardry games how those games were huge in Japan. Adventure games did pretty well over there too. So I think it's probably the most logical explanation why the game got ported over there. So there actually were plans to do a conversion of the game like the Atari Jaguar, which I imagine would have gone through the usual upgrade enhancements that games from cart to CD-ROM, from cart to CD would have gone through. But that got canceled at some point. How far along it actually got, nobody knows. Atari did announce several games that were going to be coming up with the Jaguar that never apparently had any work done on them. From talking to the people and the companies involved, involved nowadays. So, how much work if any actually got done on the port of the game? This game's unknown. If anything did actually happen, it's never been released publicly. So. Your guess is as good as mine about that. But anyway, so I mentioned before, this is as mentioned before, I call it an adventure game. Officially, it's a platform game. I guess you could argue it's both because it definitely has it definitely has elements. It definitely has elements of both. So, so this game is really kind of hard to explain because it's very interesting and unique game in many ways. So I thought maybe I might just ask Joe to just jump into this first with the overall plot and his overall impressions of the game and the gameplay, and then I'll jump in to help you and beef up what you're saying about the game as we go along with it.
And that's actually perfect because that's kind of where I started my notes on this thing. So this game looks like a typical 2D platformer with the goal of simply being able to, run from point A to point B and then, you complete the level. The thing is, man, like you're a wimpy dude, and I mean that with all due respect.
No, it definitely plays up the whole stereotype, like about the geeks in this game, for sure. Because like, the whole plot actually centers around that. Because the game opens up with you like reading a comic book in a dock for some reason. It's never explained why he's there in the first place, but he's reading. Yes. Maybe hiding up boys or whatever, because I could totally. But anyway, he falls asleep and gets picked up by a cargo ship by accident. And then, of course, the ship gets hijacked by pirates, because, of course, it does. And sinks. And sinks. He finds a life jacket, manages to swim to Turbo Island. And from there, the main game plays, and you're trying to, like, find help and whatnot. So, yeah. So, this is definitely a guy that's not... I might as well just say this now. I'll go back to you, Joe, because, sorry, I didn't mean to mention this right now, but I figure since I am talking, I guess I'll bring it in since you already mentioned the geeky aspect of it. The reason that part of the reason I call this an adventure game as well as being like a platform game is because that they're really trying here to turn the whole genre like on its head. How well that succeeded, we'll get into here, of course, later on. But, Lester is not your typical adventure character because before I played a ton of adventure games. I know you've played a bunch also yourself, Joe. So, most adventure characters are either like heroes who've been primed and trained and prepared and ready for their whole lives to go through what they're going to, or at least are capable humans who are thrust into situations they may not be prepared for, but they have at least the skills and mindset to be able to adapt to it. Another very controversial platformer game, Comic Hero for the Genesis, comes right to mind for that, because, like, again, your character, he's not a hero by any means. He's just like a comic book writer. So,
you're thinking Comic Zone.
Comic Zone. Sorry, yeah. So,
no, you're good. You're good.
But anyway. So yeah, he's also not a very typical hero character, but he at least has the mindset and the skill set to be able to handle what's being tossed to him. Lester, however, is probably the most as the title may imply, is the most unlikely person who is ever going to be a hero in a game. Period. Yeah. I mean, I cannot think of a game where a character is this unprepared and portrayed in such a way as Lester is. In fact, I think he's portrayed so harshly. I can't see a modern video game depicting him the same way, because they really, because at least they really do put him in a bad light. At least the first half of the game. We'll get into this again later on, but it's like, he does change and evolve as the game goes on, which is also like a very important part to think about the game and whatnot. Right. But it's like, playing this game initially takes me to used to, because of that, how big they used to, because of that, because like Lester, because he is such an unlikely hero, he's very timid, he's very geekish, he's very stereotypical, all these things, because like when he moves around at first start of the game, he runs this very comically silly, arms in front of him like a zombie, kind of like stumbling, running motion, which is both cute and also horrible to look at the same time. If that makes any sense. And it's like, when he sees an enemy for the first time, or even quote unquote enemy, like any kind of wildlife creature, like a turtle, a crab, a seagull, whatever, he freaks out. He screams, he runs off the screen, and then when you finally regain control of him, because you control him, because you also lose control of him like a little bit, and you're able to move back on the screen. The second time you see it, he's still a little uneasy. He's still kind of hard to move. He's still kind of like a hesitant, but you're able to get him to move. Once he defeats that creature, his fear his fear subsides even further. He is able to. He's still showing some weakness at that point, but at that point, at least he's able still to handle the creature. And like I said before, he does change through the game. We'll get into that later on, but it's like, it's a very unique way to present a game and a very unique way to present a character for sure. I'm sure there are other games out there that do this. I just cannot think of any game that I've played in my life, in my experience of video games, where characters portrayed or showed in this particular manner and in this exact way.
Yeah. So.
Yep. Go ahead.
So part of the notes that I put here is that it was frustrating and inconsistent mechanics and overly cryptic nature to the game. And I think that does describe it pretty well, especially if you don't know what you're doing, you haven't touched a manual, you have no background on this game. It's going to come off as a lot of what am I doing? What am I supposed to be doing? I think this game, so this goes back to what you were talking about, whether it's an adventure game or a platformer. I think this is more akin to a game that came out 3 years after this game. This reminds me of Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey.
I never played the Oddworld games. I have played myself, but I have seen them played. Especially the remakes. And now that you mention it, I can see that connection. Sure.
Yeah. So, that's where I made the connection. Versus when we say platformer, we're thinking like Super Mario. You know what I mean? This is not Super Mario. But that being said, Oddworld found clever ways to, work with Abe's weaknesses. And that's how a lot of the levels were designed. Here, I get what they were going for, but the mechanics come off as just irritating. Like I said, he's a wimp. He's literally afraid of everything that comes in front of him, and that affects the gameplay. So game loop kind of goes like this. Lester walks forward. He approaches a ledge to jump. He quivers in fear the first time he encounters that ledge. So, okay. Then he encounters an enemy. First encounter, he's going to run away from that enemy. So you're kind of building up courage as you're going through the game. A second attempt, he might be a little more skeptical to that edge. Same with the enemy. Might get a little bit closer, but he's still going to kind of back off. By the third time, he's finally overcome his fears. He'll make that jump or drop from that ledge, or he'll, my God, use the worst kick in any game ever to kick the enemy. And then he'll get moving. I cannot tell you, and this boils down to the frustration of this game, because like I said, I understand where they were coming from, what they were trying to do, but when I came across numerous situations where I died because Lester ran away from an enemy into a bottomless pit that I had no control over. Like, there was nothing I could do. He was going to fall in that pit, no ifs, ands, or buts. Like, you can't, jump. You can't stop the momentum. It's going to happen. It just, I don't know. Part of me is it just feels unnecessary. The system of trying 1 or 2, 3 times to overcome his fears. But I also get that's the character building that leads to later on in the game, where you can pick up weapons, like being able to throw rocks, which is fantastic. And then at the very end of the game, you're able to get a sword to fight off pirates. So, I get the progression. I don't think it was executed well. It's I can see how some people would play this and they would marvel at the game design and the concept and all that. So I understand why there's some people who will defend this game. That being said, I am someone who likes to play games. Keyword, play. I like to have fun. Keyword, fun. This game, at times, I felt like it was playing me, and I didn't have fun with it. I wanted to have fun with it because, I might as well touch on it here. The graphics are okay. Like, they're not horrible. It's nice to look at. It's very colorful. Like, they did a great job there. And even the sound is serviceable. The music's okay. Like, none of it is annoying. So there's a package here that could have been great. It's just the way it was executed. I personally, it did not connect with me.
Yeah. So, you definitely made some of the same points that I would have made. I agree with like some of that for sure. How you handle this game is definitely going to definitely in large part. I think it depends upon what you're looking for in terms of the game. Because as Joe mentioned, there are frustrating. There are frustrating parts of the game for sure, because it's and you're right. The game is very ambitious, which you could also make the argument, the argument made before online, that this game is really too ambitious like a Super NES game. So it's it really would be interesting to see a game like this made nowadays. As far as I know, it hasn't been tried again. Maybe because people are afraid to retouch the concept due to what happened to it in the 90s. But so I guess I'll just mention this right now. The lead Browning, the Eric Browning, the lead artist for the game, commented in an interview years later that he always felt the game was, it started out way. He always felt personally that the game started out way too ambitious, ended up really adequate, and I think it's a very good way of describing it. It's like they had a vision. I know what they're going for. I know what they're trying to do here. As I mentioned before, I love the whole idea. I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure how well it's executed. It's like, I'm okay with that whole Lester being scared of a creature running off, being killed by accident, whatever. It's like, it's annoying. Yes, I'm sure some people are going to hate that. I didn't mind as much as you did, Joe. I was more tolerant of that. Because I understood it played into what they were going for. Because again, what they were going for is here. It's like, there's both a good and a bad aspect to that because we're talking about the good aspect is that you get to see Lester's progression, like the game. Joe was mentioning, he gains courage, he picks up weapons. He also is one of the quests that he has to do in the course of the game. Rescues a girl like a gorilla. Again, the classic King Kong trope, and gets a kiss from her, and he gets increased courage from that. So that's for the second half of the game, he's walking pretty normally now, as opposed to that very strange, afraid gaunt that he had in the first half of the game. So it's nice to see his progression from the start of the game to the end of the game as he does various things, increases courage, whatever. The progression flow of that is very nice. That's all for the positive, because it's because I said before, there never has been a character in video game history, I think, like Lester, who's been so unprepared to deal with the adventures he has. I'm not sure if you played any of the Leisure Suit Larry games, Joe, but I also reminded of Larry quite a bit playing this game, because Larry's also kind of like that. But not even Larry's as inept as Lester is, as far as his skills and stuff going through. Going through the game. So
okay, you had me worried because I actually own all those games on Steam. I just have not played them. So that's going to be a project at some point. But that's good that it's not much like this game. I can deal with a little bit. So I think the one thing that would have fixed this game is, instead of doing the whole 1, 2, 3 try thing, I get, okay, you go to an edge, he quivers, he backs away. Okay, second time, he should be confident enough to be able to make that jump. And then same thing with an enemy. Okay, first time you encounter an enemy, it scares you. I get that. He runs away. That second time, he should be able to come in and just kind of kick it out of the way. And then when he encounters a different type of enemy, that same scared, fear is present again because, it's a different enemy than what he had encountered. I would have been okay with all that. It's the repetitiveness of it that I just felt like wasn't needed.
And that's definitely one of the downsides about the game for sure. Because like as I mentioned about the positives like about the game plot, the idea they're going for here. The negatives are what you just mentioned, Joe, the fact that they took it pretty far extreme as far as the actual, as far as the actual like fear and caution. Is it realistic? Probably. I mean, you or I, if we were in this situation, probably would continue to be scared for a long, long time afterwards. But again, but if you ask that question, you have to, the question, you then have to ask another question that people ask about all the time, about video games, and Joe, you already allude to, do you want realism like a video game? What do you play video games for?
Right.
I mean, I think it depends. Again, that's what I said before. This game is very polarizing because people have different tastes play this game and come away from it with different experiences. Because some people want to play very realistic video games. Other people want to escape from realities as far as possible of like their games, and games it's like particularly with adventure games, especially the classic ones in the 90s. Most of them were not very realistic at all. So many of them were like power fantasies or like adventure fantasies about like things that you wanted to do that there was no way in heck you ever could do. I mean, it's like what's happening less than likely is pretty realistic in the sense that this actually could happen to somebody. I mean, certain points of it are a little bit more far-fetched, but there are still power hijackings of ships at sea in various oceans, whatever. So there are people with there are like old tribes with the superstition beliefs and whatnot. So it's it's stretched a little bit, but what Lester goes through and the adventures he has is fairly realistic for a video game. It's you definitely can see these things happening to Lester. So it's very realistic, I think, how Lester's portrayed the game, but is it fun? That definitely comes down to the same old, but is it fun question, because it's there are many games, for example, I don't I'm not sure if you ever played this game before, Joe, but I recently was just reading a summary review about the new Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines game coming out.
Okay.
And they mentioned, and the reviewer felt the same way, and the reviewer mentioned those exact same points. Great game to look at, great game to, great game, great environment, great plot, boring as hell to play. So I think that. So those problems are just as present now as they were back then. So it's and so again that ties in the same point that Joe was just talking about. It's what are you looking for in a video game? What's your idea of fun? What is some people are going to find this approach very, very very liberating, very unique, and it is very unique, very interesting for sure.
Yeah.
I tolerated how Lester handled in this game. I never, don't get me wrong, I didn't love it, but I tolerated it. I think it would have been a better idea if they had done what you suggested, Joe, about the one-time only thing happening to it. But, hindsight 2020 and all that. But it's so you really, and so I think one of the reasons this game got bad press is because that people went into this game expecting to be a pretty typical platformer / adventure game, and this is not what that is at all.
Right.
So if you know what you're getting into. And this kind of so leaping ahead just a tiny bit here since it's relevant. My overall view is if you enjoy games this type and if you know what you're getting into, this is worth checking out. But like I said, you have to go in this knowing what you're getting into, because some people are not going to have the patience or the time or the understanding to deal with this, especially for like a kind of a clunky, limited tech 90s game. And like also the controls, maybe they meant they meant again, I couldn't find anything like online talking about this one way or the other, but I kind of wonder if the developers also made the controls not as tight as the usual as your platform game because of how Lester is and how he operates. But this game does not have this game. I didn't feel like a tight controls at all. I thought a lot of the action prompts and jumps and whatever were kind of like sluggish. So
yeah. I mean, and even when Lester does get a weapon, like he's like swinging it wildly, looking away,
Yeah.
So I mean, they played into the idea of the game very well. I give them credit for that. But yeah, it's the controls feel off, and I do think that based on everything else I experienced with the game, it had to be a conscious decision to do that.
Yeah, which again, it's like I don't love that choice. I tolerate it. I understand why they put it in, but I don't love it. Because you still often depend on platform games upon like tight controls. Yep. So it definitely adds a layer of difficulty to a game. Because no surprise, to probably hear this, Joe, but if you know what you're doing in this game, you can beat it like pretty quickly. It's like
I believe it.
The speed run for this game is about like 18 minutes.
Okay.
Give or take some. So we mentioned AVGN earlier. There's the speedrunner called JSL on YouTube. I also really like. He covers games that AVGN has done in the past, and this is
okay.
And this is one of the games he sped run, and he got 1840 on it. So
wow.
And overall. The overall his thoughts kind of mirrored yours. It's like he was saying, it's like it's an interesting game, not executed the best. So I'm a bit more kind to the game, as you probably have noticed, but yeah, I do agree with a lot like what you're saying. So and I think the art is pretty. I think the artist, hit the nail on the head like pretty well when he's saying, that the developer started out with a very ambitious idea, but for various reasons, some of it their fault, some of it not their fault. The finished game doesn't end up being like adequate. So that's why I said a modern take on this game with modern hardware and modern systems would be interesting to play for sure.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to insert the game that we kicked out.
That's fine, yeah.
Because this is related. So you want to talk about a game that's not adequate. So we were supposed to cover Race Driving, which is a sequel to Hard Driving. Mm-hmm. I grew up with the Genesis version, which, if you're lucky, I think gets like 15 to 20 frames per second, if you're lucky. Mm-hmm. It was not a great experience, but, it was hard driving in the home. For the Super NES, the HUD takes up like 45%, if not 60% of the screen. Like you only have a small slither where you can see the road and what you're doing. You're not really racing because they couldn't really handle the extra polygons on screen. So the SNES port of that game literally, I think, runs at like 10 frames per second max. It's like a slideshow. So you definitely dodged a bullet, not having to play that game. And like they give you 3 tracks. So they give you Autocross and Stunt, which were from Hard Drive in the arcade game. And then they made a Super Stunt track for this quote unquote sequel of Race Driving. And they're essentially the same. You have to just race around the track, complete it within a time frame, and that's pretty much the game. There's not much else there. You get to choose 4 cars. 3 of those cars are manual transmission. Then you get one that's automatic. they give you so much stuff on that HUD, like oil pressure, obviously a fuel, but then they have like temperature gauges and everything else. Like they tried to be realistic with it, but there was no need for it because those gauges mean nothing. But they were trying to do 3D on the Super Nintendo, and that's a base Super Nintendo, and they failed, miserably. So this is another game that was ambitious, and they definitely tried as hard as they could. The funny thing is, if they had waited, in this came out in 92, 93, literally almost a year later, Nintendo had the FX chip, and Argonaut Software released Star Fox and showed that 3D gaming could be done on the Super Nintendo with a little bit of help. I would have loved to have seen race driving with the help of the FX chip. There is a ROM out there where someone went in, basically, I don't know. I'm not technical, so I don't know how this stuff works, but basically he manipulated the ROM to where it's operating with the FX chip, simulated FX chip, and race driving runs at 60 frames per second. It's gorgeous. Control is still iffy. That game is one of those where, like, because of the slideshow that you're presented with as you're playing, when you kind of try to turn into the corner, you have to like tap it and just keep tapping it to go, because if you hold it, you will do a complete 360 and crash. So really, really bad controls on that game. But that's why I wanted to bring that up, just because, like, same thing. There was ambition there, probably way too much ambition. The technology just wasn't there, and if they would have waited just a little bit, they probably could have had a banger game for the Super Nintendo. And I think the same thing goes here. I think if Lester Unlikely had been developed with, just pulled back just a little bit. Like I said, being scared once makes sense. I'm okay with that. But it shouldn't be multiple times. It should be just that once.
Yeah, I don't... like I said before, I'm more tolerant about the idea. I do understand where you're coming from there, though, and believe me, you're not the only person like who feels that way. But since you already mentioned it, graphically, I thought the game was pretty good. Like I said, it's like I mentioned before, it's not amazing, but it does fit the overall theme, theme of the game very well.
Absolutely.
The backgrounds are very colorful and detailed. So Lester looks great, and it's like his full geekish form and whatnot.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
The music I actually thought the music I actually liked. I thought overall it was a pretty good soundtrack for like a typical action /platformer game. Not amazing, but the music, the music again, I thought fit the theme pretty well with the overall, the overall gameplay. The sound effects, though, I hated. It's like there's only so much I can, there's only so much of Lester screaming or groaning that I can tolerate before I'm like, nope, I'm out. So that's actually my biggest complaint about the game. Thing about that, because you can't really shut the sound effects off for all that kind of music too, unfortunately. So so you used to unfortunately you have one or the other, which is the same problem I had for a long time with Yoshi's Island until the recent ROM hacks, which address that. So.
And actually, I was just gonna bring that up. Is it's just like Yoshi's Island with crying Mario. You were able to get through that because you had that game and had been through that experience. But me, having the first time experiencing that game, that drove me nuts. But thank God I had that ROM where they cut out that crying. That made the game much more enjoyable.
Yeah, right. Yep. Exactly. So, So also, the game's also actually proof. The game's also I also would consider the game pretty difficult. I don't know how far you got in the, so I'm not sure how far you got in the game, Joe. I was actually able to beat it, but as far as what it was, the action platformer genre, I think this game's pretty up there in the difficulty scale. But I don't know how much the difficulty is actually attributable to the game itself, or because of the complications that the developers give you because of Lester being such an unlikely hero. Because I think that adds a few degrees of difficulty, above and beyond what the actual base game is. So I have no good answer for that. It's like it definitely impacted some. How much, I'm not sure, but I mean, so
the difficulty does ramp up, and I mean, I the way I saw it, I was already frustrated. So once the difficulty ramped up, I'll admit, like, I was like, all right, I'm done. And I watched the gameplay to see the end of the game. But like, I mean, yeah.
There's also finally one last major thing about this game that I dislike. They don't give you unlimited continues. You only have a few continues
right.
for the game, which is like for a game without passwords or a save state. It's like WTF, folks. But to be fair, there is a cheat code you can use that you can use like on the title screen to select your stage. So,
okay. Yeah.
So if you're worried about that, then that mitigates the pain about the game having limited continues, like to a degree for sure. So
yeah.
Curious design choice there. I'm not really quite sure like what they were thinking, but apparently the developers also had high hopes for the game. As I said before, it was a very unique, ambitious title like for time period because after the credits, they teased a sequel, which never happened. Which of course there are numerous games which tease sequels that never actually happened. I don't think even you, Joe, disliked the game as much as the developer did, though, because I already mentioned that Eric Browning gave the lead artist gave an interview about the game like years later. We're talking about the game being too ambitious for its time. Brian Greenstone has worked on numerous games over the years. He was the programmer for this game. When he was asked about it, all he said was, "Lester was a game I never liked, and don't talk about it." So,
okay.
So he obviously didn't care for the game by the time much either. So clearly to him it was just like a job that got paid on. But anyway, so we'll get into review scores and eBay here in a moment. But just in conclusion, like I said before, I don't think this game's as bad as people have made it out to be. I think again, online internet. People have made this game out to be worse than it is, as they have like numerous other video games. It's not amazing, but I had fun with it, like what it was. It's a very, like I said before, it's a very unique, ambitious idea and concept being used here. Trying to give the developers a lot of credit for it. That's what I said. I'd love to see a more modern version of this game be made these days. Maybe some indie developer finally actually will tackle this project at some point, but because I think with modern technology and systems, you certainly could like improve upon the whole idea upon having like a very unlikely hero like this, and just like have make much of a game out of it. But the game's never been re-released in any form over the years. Not a shock. It's not versus it was never super popular. But if you enjoy action adventure games, I definitely would recommend checking. I definitely would recommend checking this one out, because as I said before, you have to go to the game knowing what's going on and knowing what to expect. If you're okay with limitations of the game and the frustrations that we talked about already, and you're tolerant for that stuff, you certainly get some fun with this. Otherwise, if you want to skip it, just like watch like a YouTube playthrough or something, I don't blame you one bit, because the game can be very frustrating and slow and plotting at points. We talk about like good execution, bad game, like quite a lot. I don't think this game goes quite that far, but it definitely does. But it definitely is a project that like the artist said, I think was just too ambitious for 16-bit system at the time period to handle. Anyway, that's where I stand. Did you want to say anything else to add on to what you said before, Joe?
I mean, so usually we give recommendations whether you should play the game or not. And I'm on the fence. So part of me says, look, if you know what you're getting into, which if you listen to this podcast, you know what you're getting into, you can probably find some fun, or at least, like Greg said, speedrun was 18 minutes. You're not going to waste more than a half hour on this game. So it's not a huge loss if you play it or you don't. I personally can't sit here and recommend it. But also at the same time, like I said, Greg is correct. If you know what you're getting into, there is a good game there. It's just unfortunately buried under some poor programming.
Or more like programming choices, I think.
There we go.
But no, it's totally fair. It's like, so at the end of the day, I don't think we're too far off as far as our, as far as our final thoughts, Joe. It's like, I clearly enjoyed this game a bit more than you did, so I'm a bit more tolerant of it than you are, but at the end of the day, I don't think either one of us are too far off as far as our, final thoughts about it. But,
and we both definitely liked it a little bit more than AVGN did. So
yeah, and yes, at the end of the day, we talked about this also like off mic before too, Joe. But at the end of the day, I think, I'm the one who said we should cover this separately, and in hindsight, I'm glad we did. I think this game did. I think this game did have enough meat to it, and it was interesting enough because of its ideas and concepts to warrant staying on an episode. Whereas hard driving, I don't know what I was thinking with that game. So
race driving, I don't know how we could have made a whole episode out of that.
Race driving. Sorry, yeah.
That would have been, I think, impossible. So I think the decision to axe that and do this game instead was a good call. Was it a great call? No, but it was a good call.
Like I said before, yeah, like I said, this is a very unique game. I'm sure there are games out there that have kind of like this. I just can't think of any games off the top of my head. So, I definitely need to research more games, try to find out if there is something somewhat similar to this out there, which I'd be interested in checking it out.
I'm sure the next couple of games that we play are going to be just like this.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. So I mentioned before how this game is very polarizing. It was just polarizing back then, but back then like this is now. If you take a look at the review scores, this game magazines back when it came out. On the plus side, GamePro gave it 4 out of 5, and Nintendo Power gave it 3.7 out of 5. So those like pretty good scores. Video Game Entertainment also gave it like 8 out of 10. Super Play, however, which was a British magazine, I think. British. Okay, yeah. Only gave it 52%. So again, very wildly different opinions on this game, which again is still true today. You look online where reviews of this game, and people are all over the places. You're going to see like 7s and 8s. You're going to see 3s and 4s. Yeah. So this certainly is one of the most polarizing games I've seen out there. And it probably should not come as a shock to anybody that this game's pretty cheap to get to your collection if you want to play it. Because even though it's probably not the most common game out there, I don't know how many copies sold. We don't have, unfortunately for most titles from the 16-bit days, we don't know how many sold, unless it was like a big title like Zelda or Sonic or Mario or something like that. But your run-of-the-mill third-party published games, they either didn't release numbers at all, or just released like very rough ballpark figure numbers on games sold. There was a minimum number of copies you had to order at the factory to get made, because of course this was back in the days when you had to like place orders, and there was a 3-month wait process to get the ROMs made up and programmed and put into carts and whatever. So anyway, that's just a long-winded way of saying that. I don't know so I'm not sure how, I'm not sure how well the game sold, but probably because of word of mouth these days, which I said before, I don't think the game fully deserves the word of mouth reputation it has, but for whatever reason, you can get the game pretty cheap if you want to play it. Easily found on eBay, 53 copies of this game listed on there as we doing the research on this game. 19 copies of the game are recently sold. These prices include North America, that include shipping. You can pick up a card only this game for anywhere from like $11 to $23. So, like I said, pretty cheap as far as Super NES games go. CIB is not that much more expensive. CIB's copies sold anywhere from like $43 to $50. Even a steel copy of this game sold recently. So for the pretty cheap steel price of $352. Definitely more affordable game for your collection if you want to pick it up.
Yeah.
And for $11, I'd say it's worth the plunge. Because of course, if you're not a collector and just want to play the game legally as opposed to going through emulation, you can at least look at the manual up online. I I've never heard anybody having any morals about against doing that. Yeah. So definitely $11 for copy of the game is a pretty reasonable price to ask for, I think. So, but anyway, so fairly cheap. So anyway, we mentioned before how there were some interesting games coming up. I think the next game is actually going to be two games. Again, gets tied together, kind of the Flintstones, like earlier. Again, we're games we're going to cover in the Mad Games episode, but we decided to pull them out again because. I don't remember how Joe felt at the time, but I remember thinking at least that. Again, I think these games at least have history and meat behind them to make it to justify a whole episode. So we're going to be covering two Barbie games that came out to Super NES, which were Supermodel and Vacation Adventure. And I think the reason I think one of the thoughts I wanted to I think my thinking behind this was like two games, one episode, padded out some little bit to help out, and also we are not the target audience for these games by a long shot, because I know Barbie games are still made today. They are far and away very, very, very popular games with the target audience, i.e. young girls who play with Barbies. I remember there was this Barbie dressmaker game for the PC that Mattel sold back to the 2000s where you could actually design and make your own costumes and dresses for Barbie dolls in the program and then actually print them out and you actually use them on your own dolls, which is pretty far ahead for a time period, I will admit. That game sold millions of copies, no joke. So there's a big market here for these games. We're just not we're just not the right audience for them. So that's why I'm like, let's check these games out because I think at the very least the whole phenomenon or franchise of whatever will be interesting to talk about, especially, and we can also talk about other Barbie games too, in comparison to kind of Viz, in comparison to how these ones are, because I really don't know anything about these ones.
So I was going to say,
based on the titles. Yep, go ahead.
So this will be, I believe it's a first for the podcast, but so Supermodel was released in the US, I believe overseas as well, maybe even worldwide. Barbie Vacation Adventure was actually finished but canceled and never publicly released. A ROM leaked online, I want to say it was 10 years ago. So this will be the first time that we're going to cover a game that's not officially released, but it was finished. And I think it'll be interesting to see if we can figure out maybe why they canceled it.
Well, You mentioned officially released, so, but because technically we did that with Star Fox 2 because Star Fox 2 was never actually released until until like 2-3 years ago, as part of the Switch. And I think, but yeah, even that game officially got a release. You're right. Vacation Adventure never did get released. I actually didn't know about that. So and you actually already had done research on this.
I did, and I didn't do a lot, but I did enough to know that I saw that it was canceled and not released. But I want to say it has something to do with the publisher, which is why it was canceled. But we'll find out in 2 weeks.
Yeah, something happening with the adventure, like of the publisher. Sorry, does make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'm just like giving the game a quick look.
So it was published by High Tech Expressions, which, I mean, I can think back from when I was a kid. Like, the only game I can think of that they did was like the Sesame Street games, for the NES, and like the Muppets game. I don't know if you ever played like the Muppets Carnival game, where it's like a bunch of mini games.
A couple of them, yeah.
Yeah, so they were pretty good with those like mini game compilations and like the edutainment games. So I'm actually kind of like, I'm actually really excited for this one, just because of the fact that, like, when I think of Barbie Vacation Adventure, like, the image that pops in my head for how it could be what it is, I'm thinking like a collection of mini games, almost like California Games, which could be fun. It could be a fun game. Whereas, like, I already kind of know what Barbie Supermodel is.
Yeah.
It's like an updated version of the NES game. So, yeah. There's going to be a lot to talk about with that episode.
I'm actually seeing here the game is also. I'm actually seeing here the game is also planning to release on Genesis. And both versions got axed, which makes me think it is. Which makes me think you're right. It probably was a publisher issue then, because our old friend Software Creations programmed the games. We've already covered them for games in the past. So, but anyway, we'll get into that next time.
Yeah.
So, we do have some. Don't worry, folks. We do have some like bigger, more popular games coming down the pike. So, I actually need to confirm a recording date with Jill after we're done with recording those games. So, we appreciate you. We appreciate you being here with us for the more interesting and maybe not as popular titles on the system, because there's still a lot of stuff to go through. But
there's a lot of titles, and we knew that there was going to be some trash that we were going to come across, which is one of the reasons why we did that big 250 episode and tried to get as much of that stuff in as possible. But there's still some big hitters that we haven't covered either. So there's, keep listening. And you know what? I'm going to shill for some reviews. Hit us up. I don't even know if people still use iTunes and iPod, whatever it is, to, Apple Podcasts to listen to podcasts, because I know I use a third-party app myself. But, like, reviews. Get our score up a little bit. That makes it so that other people can discover the podcast, and then our audience grows, and, I want things like that.
Yep, I do too. So I hear you. You can also feel free to leave reviews if you want to on our Facebook page. Or you can also email me your thoughts directly at the SNES Podcast yahoo.com. Joe, where can they reach you at?
You can find me on X at JOESUX30. I post there every once in a while. I have a very public Facebook, which of course is accessible to anybody, but comes with a warning because it is not family friendly. I've been doing pretty good, but there's a warning just in case. I don't know. At this point, I might as well just call the Radical Russia Roundup dead, just because, I still haven't done anything with it. That could change. It could just be a get together with, George at some point. But I think doing this show is enough for me.
Okay, then. As always, thank you very much for listening. Like the podcast. I hope everybody out there stays safe, be well. We'll catch you again later on next time. Thank you all. Later.
Bye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Super power.